Have you ever wondered what it would be like to find out you're sharing your husband with your mother? Well, Grace's story might just make you rethink what you know about family bonds and trust. Grace had been happily married to Franklin for several years. They had met at a fast food restaurant, instantly clicking. After dating for 7 months, Franklin proposed, and Grace was thrilled to share the news with her family, even though she felt sad that her father couldn't be there to see her joy. Their wedding was beautiful, surrounded by family and friends. But after that, things started to feel off. Grace's mother began visiting them more often, sometimes staying for weeks without invitation. At first, Grace thought her mother was just lonely since she had never remarried after her husband passed away. However, Grace began to notice something strange. Every morning, while she went to work, Franklin would stay home with her mother. It didn't seem suspicious at first, but Grace started to feel uneasy. One day, when Grace came home from work, she found her mother's nightgown on their bed. Her mother explained that Franklin must have mistakenly taken it to their room. Grace didn't think much of it, but the thought lingered. Her mother had been wearing that nightgown when Grace left that morning. As time went on, Grace became more worried. Franklin, who had always been loving, started acting distant. He seemed distracted and less interested in spending time with her. Grace also found condoms in Franklin's wallet, which confused her since they had never used them. Grace didn't want to confront him right away, so she kept her suspicions to herself. One day, while at the salon, her friend asked why her mother was still living with them. Grace laughed it off, but the question stuck in her mind. It wasn't the first time someone had asked. Things started to make sense when Grace, Franklin, and her mother went out for dinner. A woman approached their table, greeting Grace's mother warmly. The woman then recognized Franklin as one of her best students from school. Grace's mother confirmed this, leaving Grace confused. The woman then asked, "And who is this young lady?" pointing at Grace. Grace's mother introduced her as Franklin's wife. The woman seemed surprised, but didn't comment further. Later, Grace confronted her mother and Franklin, demanding answers. She realized, in that moment, that Franklin and her mother had known each other for a long time and kept it a secret from her. The betrayal hit Grace hard, and she couldn't believe the truth that had been hidden from her for so long. Grace sat in the silence of her bedroom that night, her mind racing as pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The late-night whispers between Franklin and her mother, the secretive glances, the little things she'd brushed aside. All of it pointed to one unbearable truth. She knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. The next morning, Grace decided to take a day off work, to uncover the full extent of the betrayal. While Franklin left the house, she searched through his belongings. Among his papers, she found an envelope addressed to her mother, with a note inside written in Franklin's handwriting. It read, "Meet me at the usual spot tonight. We need to talk about Grace." Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't recognize the address on the note, but she knew she had to find out where it led. That evening, Grace followed her mother, keeping a safe distance as she trailed her to an upscale hotel on the other side of town. Grace waited in her car, unsure of what she'd do next. She watched as Franklin arrived minutes later, greeting her mother in the hotel lobby. They didn't even bother to look around to see if anyone was watching. Franklin placed his hand on her mother's lower back, leading her into the elevator. Tears streamed down Grace's face, but anger burned hotter than her heartbreak. She couldn't let them get away with it. Summoning her courage, Grace marched into the hotel, determined to confront them both. She demanded a key to the room they had entered, fabricating a story about being locked out. When she burst into the room, Franklin and her mother froze, caught in their web of lies. The shock on their faces quickly turned to panic as Grace let her rage explode. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed, her voice shaking with anguish. "Both of you, my husband and my mother?" Franklin stammered, but her mother stepped forward, her face pale. "Grace, I can explain." "Explain what?" Grace snapped. "That you've been sharing my husband behind my back? That you've been lying to me every day? There's no explanation that will make this okay." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but Grace refused to let her sympathy cloud her judgment. "You destroyed this family. Both of you." Franklin tried to speak, but Grace held up her hand. "Don't. There's nothing you can say to fix this." She turned and left the room, her heart breaking with every step. As she drove away, she realized that her life would never be the same. But she also knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. To be continued.